The movie begins with a nighttime air raid over London as German bombers drop explosives on the city. A young boy, Edmund Pevensey, looks out a window as searchlights and anti-aircraft fire illuminate the night sky. While he stands by the window, his mother runs toward him, pulls him away, and orders him to stay back. The bombers start coming their way, so the family decides to get out of the house. The other children in the house, Peter, Lucy, and Susan, run with their mother to save themselves. But Edmund remembers that his father's picture is still inside, so he runs to get it. Peter tries to stop him, but Edmund is already in, so he follows him. He pulls him to go out, but at that exact moment, a bomb is dropped on their house, and both boys take shelter under the kitchen cabinet. They survive, and Peter scolds Edmund for being reckless and not doing what he is told. Their mother calms everyone down.
Why can't you just do as you're told?
And the next morning, they all go to a train station. The kids are going to stay at Professor Kirke's house. They tearfully bid farewell to their mother and get on the train. They sit quietly on the train as the long journey begins. They get off at a rural place with nothing there. The kids get confused because the professor knows they are coming, but no one is there to take them. While they stand there confused, a woman comes riding a carriage. Mrs. Macready. She asks if what they are carrying is all they have before taking them back to the house. They reach the house of Professor Kirke, which is a big country house. Macready starts to lay out the rules the moment they get in. The professor doesn't want to be disturbed, so no shouting, no improper use of the dumbwaiter. And as Susan is about to touch a statue, Macready shouts at her, saying no touching of the historical artifacts. She then leaves them to settle, and the kids go to their rooms. Peter starts listening to a radio about the war, but Susan shuts it off. Peter and Susan then go to Lucy, who is crying while lying on the bed. They reassure her that the war will be over soon and they will go home. Edmund interrupts, saying their home might not even be there when they go back, and they reprimand him for being negative. After that, they all sit doing their own thing. Susan tries to teach the others a language, but everyone is bored. Lucy suggests they play a game instead,
We could play hide and seek.
and suggests hide and seek. Peter then starts counting, and everyone rushes to find a spot to hide. Susan gets inside a box, and Edmund hides behind a curtain just as Lucy is about to hide there. He tells her to find another spot because he is already there, so she runs to find a place. She then sees a big closet covered with a white sheet. She takes off the sheet and gets inside to hide. To avoid getting caught, she walks to the back of the wardrobe to be covered by the coats, but as she keeps going, she finds herself in an ice-covered place. Lucy steps into this new place she has discovered and keeps walking to navigate her surroundings. Suddenly, she starts to hear footsteps approaching her and gets startled. When she turns, she sees a fawn, a half-human, half-goat creature. They both look at each other and are equally startled. The fawn hides behind a tree, and Lucy hides behind a pole. She then comes out and starts walking toward him. She picks up the box he drops, and he also comes out of his hiding spot. She hands him the box and asks if he is hiding from her. He stutters as he speaks and tells her that he just didn't want to scare her. Curious, Lucy asks what he is,
What are you?
and he tells her he is a faun. He then assumes that she is a beardless dwarf, but Lucy corrects him, saying she is a girl. The faun is surprised that a human is here and asks what she is doing in Narnia. Lucy tells him she was just in a wardrobe, but he gets confused. When she asks what Narnia is, he tells her that the place she is in and the entire land around them is Narnia. He introduces himself as Tumnus and asks Lucy if she would have tea with him. Lucy hesitates because she wants to go back, but Tumnus insists, saying they will have cake and sweets. He tells her it's not every day he gets to make a friend, and Lucy agrees. They go to his house, and as she looks around, she sees a framed picture of Tumnus's father and tells him her father is fighting a war. He also shares that his father fought in a war, but quickly brushes it off, saying it was a long time ago. Seeing that Tumnus doesn't like the snow, Lucy reminds him of all the good things, like ice skating, snowball fights, and Christmas. But Tumnus tells her there hasn't been Christmas in 100 years, and that it has been a long winter.
It's been a long winter.
Tumnus and Lucy sit to drink tea and start talking. Tumnus then begins playing his flute, and as he does, the fire starts forming shapes of galloping horses. Lucy gets startled and starts looking at it. Then suddenly, a lion roars in the fire, and Lucy drops her cup. When she wakes up, it is already dark. She gets up thinking her siblings must be worried about her by now. She sees Tumnus sitting on the floor, crying, and she goes to him to ask what is wrong. He tells her that he is a bad person because he is kidnapping her. The White Witch gave orders to bring any human if they found one. Lucy reminds him that they are friends, so he shouldn't do this. Tumnus then takes her out of the house, and they run to the place where they first met. He tells her that she is the best friend he has met in 100 years, and cries as he says goodbye. Lucy runs to the wardrobe and finds herself back in the house. She then screams, calling out to the others, saying that she is fine, but Peter is still counting. Edmund scolds her to hide because she will get them caught, and at that moment, Peter enters the room, joking about them not understanding the game. Susan also shows up, celebrating her victory. Lucy gets confused and tells them she has been gone for hours.
Been gone for hours.
They all go to check the wardrobe, but there is nothing there except the back of it. Edmund makes fun of her, saying that she is imagining it. Lucy insists that she is telling the truth and that she didn't imagine it, but Susan orders her to drop it. Edmund keeps making fun of her, earning a scolding from Peter. He retaliates, saying that Peter is not his father before storming out of the room. Susan follows him to calm him down. Peter also walks behind them, leaving Lucy alone. She shuts the door of the wardrobe, sad that she was not believed. Later that night, Lucy takes a candle and walks to the room where the wardrobe is. Edmund sees her as she walks in the dark and follows her. He sees her entering the room and follows, calling her name, but Lucy isn't there. He then gets into the wardrobe, thinking he will find her, but she is not there. As he keeps walking, he starts to see leaves and trees inside the wardrobe before stumbling out into an ice-covered world. He is also in Narnia. He starts calling Lucy, saying that he believes her now, but she is nowhere to be found. As he keeps walking, a carriage suddenly passes next to him, and Edmund falls to the ground. A dwarf gets off the carriage, and Edmund attempts to run when he sees him, but the dwarf catches him quickly. He then gets on top of him, and as he is about to hit him, a woman comes out and stops him. She then addresses Edmund as Son of Adam and asks what he is doing there. He tells her that he is following his sister, which interests her, and she asks how many of them there are.
How many are you?
He tells her they are 4. She then invites him to sit next to her on the carriage and asks if he wants something to drink. When he agrees, she spills a drop of potion on the ground, and a glass with a hot drink forms. She asks if he wants anything to eat, and he asks for Turkish delight, which she makes the same way as the drink. She shows him her house, which is between 2 mountains, and tells him that she is the Queen of Narnia. She doesn't have children of her own, and now, seeing Edmund, he looks like someone who could be a prince and one day a king. Edmund tells her that his sister had met a man named Mr. Tumnus. The woman asks him to bring his siblings too, because a king needs servants. Edmund agrees, and she tells him to go back now and that they will meet again. Edmund watches the white carriage leave, and shortly after, Lucy emerges. Seeing him, she gets excited because he has also found Narnia. She tells him that she was with Tumnus and that the White Witch doesn't know about their meeting, so all is fine. He then asks her how they can get out because it is freezing, and they both leave through the wardrobe. Lucy goes to their room and wakes Peter and Susan to tell them Edmund saw it too. Peter asks Edmund if he really saw the fawn, but he didn't. Lucy tells them they didn't go there together and realizes that she doesn't know how Edmund got there either, so she asks what he was doing. Edmund then tells everyone he was just pretending and playing along with Lucy's theory, and that there is nothing behind the wardrobe. Hearing this, Lucy feels betrayed and runs away crying. When she gets out of their room, she stumbles upon Professor Kirk. She hugs him and starts crying, and Mrs. McCready comes to yell at the kids for making a commotion. When she sees the professor, she apologizes, and Professor Kirk tells her that Lucy needs hot chocolate. Mrs. McCready then takes Lucy with her. Peter and Susan apologize to Professor Kirk for his study. They tell him about Lucy's theory of the world behind the wardrobe, and he gets interested. They get confused by his interest, and Susan asks if he believes her. The professor tells them he does, and that they should too, since they are family.
You're not saying you believe her?
The next day, the kids are playing baseball outside. When Edmund hits the ball, it breaks a window and a vase inside the house. They all go upstairs to check, but they hear Mrs. McCready coming to see what happened. The kids run to hide to escape her wrath, and Edmund leads them to the closet. They all get inside and find themselves in Narnia, including Peter and Susan. They finally see Narnia for themselves. Peter apologizes to Lucy and calls Edmund a liar. Susan suggests they go back, but Peter wants Lucy to decide. Lucy suggests they go to Tumnus because she wants them to meet him. Peter grabs coats from the wardrobe, and they start walking in the snow. When they reach Tumnus's house, the door is broken. Seeing danger, Lucy runs inside and sees that the house is turned upside down. The glasses and cups are broken. Devastated, Lucy wonders who would do something like this. Peter then picks up a paper nearby and reads its contents. Tumnus has been arrested for high treason against Her Imperial Majesty Jadis, Queen of Narnia, for comforting her enemies and fraternizing with humans. Hearing this, Susan decides they should go back, but Lucy is worried about Tumnus. She tells them that the human in question is her, and that Tumnus was arrested because of her, so they must help him. Peter agrees, but Edmund reminds them that Tumnus is a criminal. As they talk, they hear a bird's call and step outside. Then they start to hear footsteps. They all huddle together, scared, but it is only a beaver. Peter tries to pet him, but the beaver starts talking.
I ain't gonna smell it if that's what you want.
Lucy laughs at Peter, seeing him shocked. Mr. Beaver then calls Lucy by her name and gives her Tumnus's handkerchief. He tells her that Tumnus gave it to him as he was getting arrested. He then says they should leave this place to talk safely and runs through the trees. Susan is not on board with the idea of following a talking beaver, but after a brief discussion, they all follow Mr. Beaver. They arrive at his home, where he lives with Mrs. Beaver, who excitedly greets them, saying she never thought she would live long enough to see this day.
Come inside, and we'll see if we can't get you some food.
They go inside, and as they sit for a meal, Lucy asks if there is anything they can do to help Tumnus. The beavers tell her that it is difficult to rescue him from the White Witch's grip, but now Aslan is coming back. Edmund asks who Aslan is, and the beavers laugh at him for not knowing, but seeing the children's confusion, they realize none of them know who Aslan is. Peter explains that this is the first time they have been here, so they don't know anything about this place. Mr. Beaver explains that Aslan is the true king of Narnia, and that now the prophecy is coming true. When they realize the kids don't know about the prophecy, they explain that it states when 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve sit on the thrones of Caer Paravel, the witch's reign will end, and Aslan will once again rule Narnia. They tell them that Aslan's return and Tumnus's arrest are all happening because of them, since they are the foretold sons and daughters. At this, Susan gets up, saying that they are not the right people for this and that they must leave. The beavers tell them they can't just leave, and Lucy agrees, saying that they must help Tumnus. But Peter tells her that it is out of their hands and turns to call Edmund, only to realize he is not there. They all look shocked, but Mr. Beaver calmly asks if Edmund has been to Narnia before, realizing that he has been manipulated by the White Witch. They all run toward the White Witch's castle and see Edmund entering. Lucy calls out and Peter decides to go after him, but Mr. Beaver stops him, saying that Edmund is being used as bait to lure them in. The witch wants to kill them to stop the prophecy from happening.
The witch wants all 4 of you!
Susan blames Peter for what is happening to them, and they start to argue. Mr. Beaver cuts them off and tells them that the only one who can help Edmund now is Aslan. Peter then asks Mr. Beaver to take them to Aslan. Inside the castle, Edmund is caught by a wolf, who asks him why he is there. Edmund explains that he met the queen in the woods, and that she invited him here. When the wolf realizes that Edmund is a human, he apologizes and leads him to the queen. Edmund sits at her throne, but quickly stands up when she arrives. She greets him calmly at first, but then starts yelling at him for not bringing his siblings. He explains that he brought them halfway, and that they are now at the beaver's house. Hearing this, the witch calms down and tells the dwarf to take Edmund away. She then calls the wolf and orders him to do what must be done. The wolves rush to the beaver's house, and the beavers, along with the 3 kids, quickly grab important things and prepare to escape. When the wolves break in, they crawl into a hole and run through a tunnel. The wolves see the opening and follow them. The beavers and the kids emerge in a land filled with frozen animals. When Peter asks what happened here, a fox appears from behind and tells them that this is what happens to those who cross the Queen.
This is what becomes of those who cross the witch.
He then tells them they don't have time and must hide. When the wolf emerges from the tunnel, the beavers and the kids are hiding in a tree, and only the fox remains. Initially, he denies seeing any humans, brushing it off as impossible. But when they attack him, he lies, saying that the humans went north, misdirecting them, and they let him go. Later that night, the group sits around a fire. The beavers treat the fox's wounds, but it is time for him to go because he needs to gather more people for Aslan. The beavers excitedly ask if he has seen Aslan and what he looks like. The fox tells them that Aslan looks exactly like everything they have heard about and bids farewell to the kids. He calls Peter king and tells him they are needed for the war against the witch, but Peter is not here for a war. He just wants to get his brother. The fox tells him they can't fight the war without them. Back in the White Witch's castle, Edmund is in prison with shackles on his leg. Someone beside him asks for his food if he is not going to eat, and Edmund gives it to the person. It is Tumnus. Seeing that he is a faun, Edmund asks if he is Tumnus, and Tumnus also assumes he is Lucy's brother because they have the same nose. As they talk, the prison door opens, and the White Witch enters with her soldiers. She picks Edmund up by his clothes and tells him that her guards searched the beaver's house, but his siblings were not there. She demands to know where they are, but Edmund doesn't know. She then raises her spear to stab him, but Edmund tells her that he heard them talking about Aslan.
The beaver said something about Aslan.
Though he doesn't know where he is. She then orders Tumnus to be released and tells him that Edmund reported him, which is why he was arrested. She then leaves the prison with her guards, leaving Edmund and Tumnus behind. The group continues their journey and reaches a place near a river. Mr. Beaver tells them that Aslan lives just across the river. Meanwhile, Edmund is taken out of the prison, and when he goes upstairs, he sees Tumnus frozen. He is then taken to the carriage and sits below the White Witch as they ride. At the same time, the kids and the beavers start walking toward the river, but hear a carriage approaching. They all run to escape, assuming it is the White Witch. They hide under a rock, and they see the shadow of a man above them, but he doesn't notice them. After the man walks back, Peter decides to check, but Mr. Beaver tells him it's better if he goes instead. Mr. Beaver steps out and, shortly after, returns to tell them everything is safe. It is not the White Witch. When the kids emerge from their hiding spot, they see the Father of Christmas. Susan asks how he is here if there is no Christmas in Narnia. He tells her that things are changing now that they are here and that Aslan is coming back. He then takes out presents for each of them: a dagger and a cordial that can heal any injury for Lucy, a bow and a magical horn for Susan, and a shield and sword for Peter. He tells them that these presents are tools, not toys, and that they should use them wisely. He also mentions that winter is coming to an end. He gets on his carriage and says, "Long live Aslan," before leaving.
Long live Aslan.
The kids and the beavers yell Merry Christmas as he leaves. Peter then realizes that winter ending means the ice will start melting, so he suggests they escape as fast as possible. Susan hesitates, but Peter insists that they must go now. Mr. Beaver starts leading the way, looking for ice that won't crack. Suddenly, they see the wolves coming from above and start running, but the wolves appear in front of them. They capture Mr. Beaver and threaten the kids. Peter takes out his sword, but the wolves keep walking toward them, throwing threats. Susan, afraid for their lives, tells Peter to drop his sword. At that moment, Peter decides to break the ice and plants his sword into the icy ground. This causes an iceberg to crack, and the water pushes the ice they are on towards solid ice. The kids and the beavers emerge from the water and land on solid ice, but Peter realizes that what he is holding is only Lucy's coat, not Lucy. They frantically search for Lucy, but she comes from behind, asking if anyone anyone has seen her coat. Relieved, they all hug her. The beavers then lead them into the forest and they continue walking, admiring the beauty of the newly emerging summer. Back at the Queen's camp, the wolves throw the fox before her and tell her that he is the traitor. The fox apologizes, saying, "Your Majesty," and the witch, thinking he is addressing her, tells him to stop with the flattery. But the fox makes it clear that he is talking to Edmund. Hearing this, she raises her spear to stab him, but Edmund interrupts and mentions that he heard something about a stone table and an army. The White Witch thanks Edmund, but ends up stabbing the fox and freezing him. Meanwhile, the group reaches a campsite where they see troops of centaurs, half-horse, half-human creatures. They walk among them, and Peter takes out his sword and tells one of them that they are here for Aslan.
We have come to see Aslan.
The entire troop kneels, and from a tent, a lion emerges. It is revealed to be Aslan. The kids also bow before the king. Aslan greets them and asks about the fourth one, referring to Edmund. Peter tells him that Edmund has been captured and that they are here so Aslan can help them rescue their brother. Aslan asks how that happened, and Mr. Beaver reveals that Edmund betrayed them. One of the troops interrupts, saying that he too once betrayed them, but Aslan remains focused on rescuing Edmund. Later, Aslan and Peter talk alone on a cliff. Aslan tells him that they will get Edmund back and that they will fight the White Witch, but Peter is skeptical about the war. He doesn't think he is who everyone in Narnia believes he is. Aslan gives him words of encouragement to motivate him. Meanwhile, Edmund is tied to a tree with his mouth gagged. The dwarf walks around him, threatening him. Back at the camp, Lucy and Susan go into the forest, playing and splashing water while laughing. Suddenly, two wolves appear and threaten them. Susan immediately blows her horn, and Peter, hearing it, runs toward them, drawing his sword. When he arrives, he sees the wolves surrounding Lucy and Susan. They begin to threaten him, but Aslan appears and captures one of them. The other lunges at Peter, but he stabs it. Aslan then releases the captured wolf and orders his troops to follow it. After this, Aslan pronounces Peter Knight of Narnia. The wolf that escaped leads Aslan's troops directly to the Queen's camp. The Queen hears the commotion and comes out to see all her men dead and the dwarf tied where Edmund should have been. She angrily cuts the ropes around the dwarf, but leaves without killing him.
You're not going to kill me.
Peter steps out of a tent and sees Edmund talking with Aslan on top of a cliff. Lucy and Susan also come and see Edmund. Lucy excitedly calls for him, but Peter tells her to wait. Aslan and Edmund walk toward them, and Aslan tells the kids not to bring up the past. He then leaves Edmund with his siblings. Lucy and Susan hug Edmund happily. Peter then tells him to sleep. The next day, as they eat breakfast, Peter announces that the three of them should leave because he promised their mother he would keep them safe. They argue about it, and Edmund refuses to go. Following this, Susan gets up and tells them that she is going to train. Susan and Lucy train, while Edmund and Peter also train with swords on horseback. As they all train, the White Witch arrives. She is here to meet Aslan. She tells him that he has a traitor and that, by the law of Narnia, traitors belong to her. She claims her ownership over Edmund. Peter draws his sword, but the White Witch repeatedly warns them that Narnia will be destroyed if they don't follow the rules. Aslan asks to speak to her alone, and they enter a tent. After a while, they come out, and the White Witch gets into her carriage. Aslan announces that she has dropped her claim on the son of Adam, and everyone cheers. But Lucy observes that Aslan looks sad. At night, as everyone sleeps, Lucy hears Aslan walking outside. She wakes Susan, and they both follow him. Aslan hears them and asks why they aren't sleeping. They ask if they can walk with him, and he allows them to come. But after walking for a while, he tells them that he must walk alone now. He then goes to where the White Witch and her troops are and walks between them. The White Witch steps forward and orders everyone to strike him. They begin to hit him and tie him up. The White Witch then gives an order to shave him, and the dwarf and the others start cutting his mane. Lucy and Susan watch everything from afar. The White Witch then tells Aslan that he is not going going to save anyone by dying. She then turns to her crowd and declares that they will take over Narnia forever tomorrow. With that, she stabs Aslan, killing him. Lucy and Susan, shocked, begin to cry. After everyone leaves, Lucy and Susan go to where Aslan's body lies. Lucy takes out her cordial to heal him, but Susan tells her that it is too late. They both begin crying over his body, and then rats emerge and cut the ropes around Aslan. Susan decides that they should go, but Lucy doesn't want to leave Aslan. Suddenly, the wind starts to blow the leaves, and Lucy and Susan realize that the leaves are carrying a message, so they stay. The leaves travel to the camp and enter Peter's tent, bringing the bad news. The entire camp searches for Aslan, but he is nowhere to be found. Edmund asks Peter to lead them into battle, but Peter hesitates. One of the troops tells him they must do this for Aslan, so they set off for war, with Peter leading them. From the opposite side, the White Witch's army emerges. They charge toward Peter's army, and Peter commands the birds to begin their attack. The birds carry stones and drop them on the White Witch's army. Then, Peter's army also charges forward, and the battle begins. Meanwhile, Lucy and Susan decide to leave, but as they stand up, they hear a creaking sound. They turn to see that the stone table Aslan was on has cracked, and Aslan is no longer there. They are confused, but shortly after, Aslan appears. Excitedly, they hug him and ask how it is possible. Aslan explains that he has returned because if a willing victim who has committed no treachery is killed in a traitor's place, the stone table will break and death will reverse. They tell him about the war, and he tells them to climb on his back because they must go somewhere. Back on the battlefield, the war rages on. The White Witch joins the fight, and seeing this, one of Peter's troops runs toward her, cutting down her soldiers in the process. Peter falls from his horse after being struck by an arrow on his armor. He sees the soldier running toward the White Witch, but when he reaches her, she dodges his sword and strikes him with her spear, freezing him. Aslan takes Lucy and Susan to the White Witch's castle. It is filled with petrified creatures, and among them, Lucy sees Tumnus. She starts crying, but Aslan steps forward and breathes on him. At that moment, Tumnus revives and sees Lucy. They embrace, and Susan joins in. Aslan then revives the others and tells them they must go and help Peter. On the battlefield, Peter and his army start getting outnumbered. Seeing the White Witch, Edmund decides to join the fight. He fights the witch and manages to break her spear, but she stabs him and he falls. Seeing this, Peter becomes enraged and charges toward her. The two begin fighting. Suddenly, Aslan emerges from the cliff above, along with Lucy, Susan, and the creatures he saved. They all join in the fight. Peter gets wounded during his battle with the White Witch, and just as she is about to kill him, Aslan leaps at her and kills her. Then they all turn their attention to the wounded Edmund. Lucy takes out her cordial and puts a drop in his mouth. Shortly after, he gets up. The three siblings hug each other in relief and happiness. Aslan revives the frozen troops, and Lucy runs around healing the wounded. After all this, the four siblings are crowned: Queen Lucy the Valiant, King Edmund the Just, Queen Susan the Gentle, and King Peter the Magnificent.
I give you King Peter.
Now it is time for Aslan to leave. Tumnus tells Lucy that she will see him again when the time comes. 15 years later, the four siblings are now adults, riding their horses while chasing a stag. They come across the lamppost that Lucy first saw when she entered Narnia. She vaguely remembers it, as if it were a dream, but they continue walking past it. Soon they find themselves back in the house of Professor Kirke. No time has passed since they left for Narnia. The professor opens the door and asks what they are doing there. Peter tells him that he wouldn't believe them if they told him, but the professor tosses him a fruit and tells him to try.
Try me.
Sometime later, Lucy goes back to the wardrobe, but Narnia is no longer there. Professor Kirke tells her that he has also tried, but assures her that they will return when they least expect it. Then they walk away together.